Most people think that the current economic and financial chaos is a new phenomenon, but the trap was actually set in 1971 when the world's money was turned into a lie. My last conversation with George Bodine was the most watched episode in the history of this show, and for good reason. In this episode, he shares how he lived through that exact moment in 1971, the Nixon shock, as he watched 14% inflation destroy his hard work in real time. We discuss why traditional career advice is now dangerous, why safety is an illusion, what it takes to build a free life, and how to build the mental toughness required to survive the chaos of the next decade. And stick around as George shares one specific mistake that he made in his 20s that he says is the exact same trap that younger people are falling into today. This is a masterclass on life philosophy from a man who actually lived it. All right. Let's dive in. George Bodine, welcome back to Bitcoin for Millennials.
Oh, thanks, partner. I'm excited to have a conversation today.
Yeah, I'm happy you're here, but I have to start by saying, our last conversation is officially the most watched episode in the history of this podcast. Over 160,000 people tuned in. And I think it's because they resonated with your absolute conviction on Bitcoin, but I also think it was because of how you shared how your conviction kind of was forged over this crazy lifetime of experience that you've had. So today, I don't really want to talk about like price or sentiment. I do think we're going to talk about focus. But I kind of want to decode your life experience and kind of go through, every decade and see, what you experienced, lessons you learned, and of course we'll tie in money, Bitcoin, everything that we're thinking about today, if you're up for it.
That sounds great. I'll try to keep it not too boring here, but actually, I can tell you something. I've got so many experiences in life that, you pick a decade and I can tell you what's going on.
Well, let's start, at the start, between 20 and 30, I think, when you look back at your 20s, what was like the biggest lie that society told you that you fully believed, like hook, line, sinker? And how long did it take for you to unlearn it? And how did that go?
Well, that's great, because guess what? That was the period of the uncoupling of gold from the dollar. 71, I was just transitioning from a teenager. Within a couple years, I'd be in my 20s. And I got to see the fallout from that. I actually got to see firsthand what it was like to have gold decoupled from the dollar in 1971 with Nixon. I remember the talk that he gave on television. And I will say that one of the most interesting things is that I bought that speech hook, line, and sinker. I believed him when he said that the dollar was being attacked by speculators outside the country, that they were a threat, and that we needed to basically rally behind the dollar and support this move. And, I was young at the time. Very soon, within a couple of years, I'd already got kicked out of high school, and I was just like flipping burgers and stuff. But within a couple of years, I was going to the university, although I did drop out of college too. But then I started working in the oil fields. And during that period, I was worked in the oil fields for a while. Then I transitioned. I was a cop for a while. Finally, I just got wanderlust. And still, while I was in my 20s, I drifted south across the high plains of Colorado. I ended up in the mountains, the Rocky Mountains, and I became a miner, underground miner. And so this was a really turbulent decade. I got to see what happened. And, no matter how hard I worked, what I saw afterwards in that decade was that I could never get in front of these pricks. I began to realize that the lies that were told to me revolved all around money. In other words, what is money? And at that time, I realized that I could not escape this system. No matter how hard you work, I put in over 100 hours a week sometimes in the oil fields. And I made great money. I made great money underground too. But no matter how hard I worked, it just seemed like it was always evaporating. Because guess what? I got to see what happened next. Within let's see, by the end of the 70s, I was in that decade you're talking about, inflation was up to 14.5%. A 30-year mortgage was 18%.
Wow.
A car alone was 21%. So you couldn't outrun that. People were out there, spending cuck bucks as fast as they could get them. I'd get my paycheck and I'd just go out there and blow the thing. When I was in the oil fields, I'd buy maybe a weapon or something, a pistol, or I'd go out there partying, go for a weekend up in Jackson Hole. Money just didn't have value because you couldn't hold on to it. So of all the things of all my eyes that were opened in that particular decade, that was it. It all revolved around 1971 and Nixon closing the gold repatriation window.
I think one of the things today, and you just mentioned, like in your 20s, you worked in the oil fields, you were a cop, like you did all these different things. You tried out a lot of different stuff. And I think like nowadays, a lot of young people, I think also because of money, but they don't really realize it yet, they're kind of like paralyzed by anxiety, or they want to be safe. They don't really want to try things like you did. Can you talk a bit through that? Like, is that something you see today? Was that like really different when you were 20? Were a lot of people just trying out stuff and basically taking a lot of risk? And what did that bring you?
Wow, that's that's really insightful. I mean, I hadn't actually thought about what you just said, but you're right. That's the other thing. If I look back to that period, the generation that came out of the 60s, the hippie movement, and how that transitioned into the 70s, wow. I mean, people were different there, especially young men and women too. But I mean, people were maybe more confident or just not afraid to do things. I see what you're saying about, what the poor millennials have had to go through here in the last decade or two, which is that basically there's so much fear out there. That 10 years ago, everybody was hyper-focused on what is a career path. How do you get into college? How do you, get into a program that starts your career so that you have a future that's safe and secure? And people want money. In fact, if you look at recent polls, that is one of the biggest concerns about those that are in their 20s and 30s today, is they want to be wealthy or rich, however you want to view it. Having money, being rich is not wealthy. Wealthy is something different. It involves understanding that time is your most precious resource. So when you talk about that particular period, there was more flexibility. I mean, look, I was a college dropout. I went back to college. I started a new career when I got into my 30s. And I felt like I wasn't restricted. I felt like I could change myself. And, it's a mistake to think that doesn't exist today. With where the economy is going and with AI and what's going to transition here over the next 3 to 5 years and what I consider to be the final end of the fourth turning, the crisis mode, people are going to have to be flexible. If you're young now, you're going to have to be looking outside the box. You're going to have to be thinking about, you're going to have to anticipate things that most people cannot see in front of them. You've got to be flexible, but you've got to be fleet of foot. And you're going to need to be using AI, in my mind. If you're not using it now, you're making a mistake. Every day you should be using some form of AI, whether it's in your job currently or if it's in something you're looking in the future. There's so many opportunities out there. And I think the world in the future, for those who really do want to be wealthy, I think it's going to involve not just AI, but being an entrepreneur, escaping the type of, my job path was one of work for someone else, get a paycheck. I didn't have that vision that allowed me to get out on my own. I did later in life, but you know what? At that particular period, you could do that. You could just move around. There were jobs, even in that period of horrible inflation. If you knew what you were doing, you could find a niche. You could find a place where you could be and be successful.
When it comes to holding Bitcoin securely, peace of mind starts with architecture. On-Ramp's multi-institution custody model distributes control access across 3 independent regulated key holders in a 2 of 3 multi-sig quorum. No single point of failure, no pooled or omnibus exposure, just segregated client-titled vaults. You retain full legal ownership while On-Ramp coordinates security, compliance, and operational workflows behind the scenes. Multi-institution custody is the foundation for everything that On-Ramp builds. Sound infrastructure that distributes counterparty risk and provides fault-tolerant resilience with clear audits and institutional controls. And now On-Ramp is piloting flat, predictable pricing to make best-in-class Bitcoin custody and financial products more accessible than ever. Visit onrampbitcoin.com to learn more and sign up with code BRAM, that's BRAM, to receive $150 in Bitcoin after your first deposit. On-Ramp, strength in many, simplicity in one. You obviously worked your face off in your 20s and you tried all these different things. Do you think that's the way to go? Or maybe now looking back, you would say like, no, you should actually take more time, maybe for the decade after, to kind of see where you could go, if that makes sense, right? Like, I just think this is an interesting debate. Like, and it doesn't feel like voluntary, right? It feels like either forced by a certain narrative, work-life balance, or it feels forced by the necessity of seeing, the money is getting debased, AI, whatever, all these opportunities.
I don't think I've really discussed this before, but when I was 17 years old, my parents let me go to Europe with a backpack, and I hitchhiked all through Europe for the summer. And it was something that changed my life. I mean, forever. I was never the same when I came back from that trip. So I think there is something to be said for life experiences. They can build a lot of confidence. They can open up your vision. They can let you see a world that perhaps you can't see that's right in front of you. I tell you, Bram, I'm almost, in today's world, I'm almost uncomfortable trying to give anyone any advice on how they would pursue a future in this coming world. I think that this next 3 to 5 years is going to be incredibly chaotic. I don't know. I'm sure that you have followed the fourth turning theory and read some of Neil Howe and Strauss's work on the fourth turning. And, I believe that fourth turning, the book that they wrote in 1997, where they predicted the great financial crisis, I believe that's happened. And if you think that the great financial crisis was like the end point to the fourth turning, it's not. It's not. It never stopped. We are in it now, today. And it's going to come to a critical point here in the next 3 to 5 years. I mean, that's where it's going. So I don't have the ability to try and somehow predict, because it's going to be many times the fourth turning in the crisis mode, it lasts about 20 to 25 years. And, I won't bore the readers too much, or the viewers, but the bottom line is it's based on something called the seculum, the idea of a longest lived life within a particular period of time. Usually it's about 80 to 100 years. And it's broken down in 4 different archetypes, or 4 different people that grow up in that period. But the system, or the cycle itself, is actually four different cycles. Almost think of it as like, spring, the birth, and then summer, fall, and winter. Or in this case, it's called the crisis mode. And I think they accurately predicted it. I think that the fourth turning is a valid cycle theory, especially applied within this country, and that we are going to see an incredibly turbulent time coming forward. So for young people, or people that are in this system right now, what I say is you need to be thinking about protecting yourself through this chaotic, sometimes violent period, because often it's violence. I mean, these periods, if you look at it, from the birth of this particular country, we had the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and then the financial crisis, the Depression, followed by World War II. Those are the 3 crisis modes, and they last about 20 to 25 years. And we're coming up on one now. So they end in very, sometimes, chaotic, kinetic war. I think that this particular period is going to be really tied very closely to digital, like almost a digital war. And therefore, again, I'm telling you right now, Bitcoin is the answer in this coming world. And you're going to need digital assets. You're going to need to be holding things that the government cannot print. And so my advice to people right now is to get through this period, prepare yourself, and maybe study the fourth turning. Start thinking about what you need to do for your own future. And so I can't really give career advice. I can just say that I think that you need to be really aware and have your eyes wide open right now in this particular period of time.
Yeah. No, I think that's actually great advice. I mean, every period has its own opportunities, right? But I think what you're describing is more of like a bigger theme of a bigger cycle that is actually, ending, and the ending is usually in chaos. So whatever your plan was, right? Like I think also a lot of people that listen to this that are millennials that have young children, like for my children, I'm trying to get to the point where I have integrated the concept of my idea of their future being totally different than what I had before. That's one. And that's not only career, but also school and media, money, like all these things, right? Like I think that I'm still not there, right? But because you grow up with this certain picture of a path of life, not only your own, but then also your children, right? So I think that's quite a harsh thing that well, I'm going through. I think more people are going through. But like for the people that are in my age range, that are kind of in the, let's say, peak fiat, peak career age, you know, people have mortgages and they're buying shit to impress people they don't like, you know, stuff like that. Maybe a bit unrelated, but I'm just wondering, like, did you ever fall into that trap? Because it's also kind of like the age range where, you know, most people have some money because they have a certain career, right? They have a place where they live. So it's kind of, it's a bit more comfortable than perhaps the 20s where you're like really figuring it out. And so, yeah, I was just wondering if you ever fell into that trap. But then also, and that does connect, I think, to what you just said. Like, I think that idea is so interesting, putting it in a context of what you mentioned, right? So people that are still comfortable and they're, you know, keeping up with the Joneses while kind of like in a meta sense around them, this stuff is happening at like an accelerating rate.
Yeah, exactly. You know, in the 20s, your frontal cortex, your brain is not fully developed, so you don't have sometimes good impulse control or the ability to think farther ahead. Hopefully by the 30s, if you make it, you are thinking a little bit more farther in the future. But, you know, I will say that, I've done everything probably wrong in finance that you could possibly do. And in my 30s, I definitely fell into that trap of falling into what the U.S. Pushes, which is consumerism. You know, our economy is driven, 67% of our economy is driven by consumer purchases. Most people don't realize it, but right now, 10% of the wealthiest people in our particular country, the U.S., are responsible for about 50 to 60% of that consumer spending right now. Again, it's a K-shaped recovery or economy, and the wealthy are getting wealthier. They have the money to spend. But I did fall into that trap of trying to keep up with neighbors. I remember buying a very expensive house when I was in my 30s. I had gotten out of the Navy. I was in a Top Gun aggressor squadron, and I got out of the Navy. I got hired by Delta Airlines, and I immediately bought a very expensive house, probably one I couldn't afford, really. So what did that do? It hamstrung me. You know, it put like a ball around my an ankle weight here around my ankle that I had to drag around with me everywhere I went. And it took me years to both get out of that and to find a lifestyle that was totally different. It's so weird because, you know, by the time I ended my 30s and I transitioned to the 40s, I sold that home. And my wife at the time myself and 2 young kids, we bought a camper. We got in a camper and started traveling all over the country. And I flew out of a base out west in Salt Lake City for Delta. And at the time, I would just go to campgrounds all summer long. We just traveled all over the place. Every time I was off a trip, we'd get in the camper and we'd just go bum around. You know, I had more money at that time than I could throw a stick at because basically, you know, I had no expenses. I mean, I was just living in a camper, having the best time of my life. And my kids still remember that period. It was one of their happiest moments also. And it lasted for quite a while. Finally, we had to transition in the wintertime. We got our house. But you know what? I never was the same after that period. By the time I transitioned to the 40s, I had completely left that world behind of just consumerism and trying to keep up with my neighbors. I began to look outside and understand what was important. And the things that I was chasing at that time, they were not important, bro.
Well, it's like I send you my questions up front, which I didn't,
You didn't.
because you're teeing up the next one. But I love that you touch upon this, because what I wanted to ask is, like, you know, late 30s, early 40s, you know, for dads that are listening, right? You know, people are trying to balance, you know, their drive to provide resources, you know, money, but also they want to provide presence, so time with their children. It sounds like you apparently did a good job at that, or you had that opportunity. Is there something you would change when you look back at that time, or do you think like what you did was a good ratio or a good way to set that up with spending time with your kids as well?
If you're listening out there, you're watching this, just remember that your life is a journey. It is not a destination. I guess the final destination is when you go down to the river Styx and you meet the boatman and he takes you across the river for your final trip on this planet. There is no end to this journey that you're in until that moment. Until that time, it's just a journey. And every single thing you do shapes who you become as a man or as a woman. It's who you become. So would I change anything or close any doors or open any doors? You know, I have tremendous regrets in my life, things that I have done that I'm not proud of, things that I wish I could take back. But everything that I've done in my life brought me here to this moment. And you mentioned something, and I want to key on that, which is it's time. Time is the most precious resource. You know, I was born in the 50s, and I grew up in the 60s, and I had a mom that was home. You know, at those days, a man could go out, he could work, my dad did all kinds of different jobs. But one of the places we lived at, there were factories where a man could go in there, work, and he could support an entire family, buy a house, have a car. And if the wife wanted to work, she could. And if not, she could stay home. And, you know, my mom did. I mean, and the time that I had with my parents is something I will never forget. It shaped who I am as a man. You know, my dad, he would take us camping. He'd take us out for hikes out in the woods. My mom, she was just somebody you could always count on. These people, the things you do now, they do echo in eternity, and they echo beyond your life here on this planet. My dad has shaped me. My mom has shaped me. The two of them, you know, they were in love, married, spent their whole lives together. I still miss them every day. My dad died young, and they were always there for me. And so the things that are important right now are time. And I know that we're all trying to get ahead and see that one of the most horrible things about where we are today as a society, and I'll just speak from the U.S. viewpoint, is that everybody under the roof has got to work now. I mean, if you could put your dogs to work, you would probably put them out there earning money too. You know, the average median age for a citizen in the United States to buy a first home is 40 years old. The median age for a home purchase right now is 60 years old. And that's because you got people like me buying houses, trying to do something to protect their wealth. This system is so dicked up right now. And it is causing everybody to run around on a hamster wheel so that they can never get a chance to just stop. They can never enjoy time. And of all the things that Bitcoin has given me, the greatest gift is to have my time back. I live outside this system. I live outside the world around me. I don't give a how many cuck bucks they print this year. I don't care. Go ahead, print them away. I care about my kids. I care about my grandkids. But as far as me and being affected by this world I live in, I'm not there anymore. I have my wealth in Bitcoin. Believe it or not, I actually do have some gold and silver, but I've always, I've always liked precious metals, and I've never had anything against gold bugs. I've never had anything against them, or I've always been able to embrace that. Speaking of my parents, my dad, in the 70s when they legalized, 1975, they legalized possession of gold again for U.S. citizens. What do you think my dad did? Smart son of a bitch. He went down there, he bought a bunch of gold. I remember him bringing whole gold coins, and we would hide them in the rafters down in the basement. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, this world we live in is not right. It's fake. This fiat world is driven by things and incentives that aren't aligned with who we are as human beings. It steals everything. It steals our ability to be creative. Look at me in the studio here. That's another thing. I'm out of this world now. I'm selling my work in galleries, but I don't need them. I can do whatever I want. If I want to go back there, I can paint a peach. I can paint some guy smoking a cigarette. I can do anything I damn well want anymore. And it's a nice feeling. And that feeling's coming for you out there if you'll just get through this next few years and hold on to your Bitcoin. That's all you got to do.
I find the a transition from like 20 to like 30 to then like, let's say mid 40s, 50s, very interesting, right? Like at that point when usually like the children are a bit older or they're like almost out of the home, let's say, right? There's a lot of people that then ask themselves like, oh, is this it? Right? Like, is this the path that I want to follow or not? Right? Like a lot of people have this midlife crisis or whatever you wanna call it. You obviously didn't really have a traditional path, but this thing you're talking about with time, I do believe that at some point, I have it now, but I also think that's what Bitcoin brought me, that it gave me more attention to that, but it also, I didn't have that before. But I think the kind of like midlife crisis is about time. Like, should I spend my time on this? Should I be doing that, right? And people start to kind of question their path and what they did before. Well, your path is very unconventional, as we know. When did you learn that part about time? Like, was Bitcoin involved, or did that happen before that?
Yeah, that's another. I haven't really thought about that. It's funny sometimes. It's hard to look back and to see transitions in your life. It's good to be reflective about where you are today and how you got here. And it's interesting because this feeling that I have about time is something that's much more recent. I'd have to say it's when you cross a certain point, and I don't know where it is, for every person's going to be different, but someday you will be me. Brahm, you'll be sitting there, I'll be gone, but you'll be my age. You'll be sitting there and you'll be looking back on your life. And I'd have to say that somewhere past, like, say, 65 or so, I began to see that my horizon in front of me was shrinking. I just turned 70, and I can see it now in front of me. I've got a certain amount of period left. My last block is out there being mined right now and is coming towards me. And of all the things that I have looked back on, again, it's time that's so precious. And then what is wealth? First off, wealth is health. I'll tell you right now, I'm as strong as an ox right now, and I feel great. And it's a wonderful gift, but you have to work at it too. And then the other thing is that connection with family, with friends, to have some feeling of purpose in life. I think that's going to be very, very difficult for people in here once we get through this crisis. If AI has the promise that I believe it does, we are going to have more time on our hand and a lot less purpose, at least a purpose-driven life as we've done in the past. I think we're going to have to reinvent ourselves. Again, this is a great time to be flexible. If you're young, I would embrace AI as much as I can. I'd use it as much as I can. I would try to envision myself in a world that I want to live in. And again, digital assets like Bitcoin, because it's going to be a digital world. This next world, we're not going back to analog. This is digital. AI is going to cement that. It will be permanent change. It's going to be a digital world. It's going to be digital money, meaning probably stable coins, but Bitcoin will be like U.S. Treasuries as a neutral reserve asset someday going forward. So you may have liquidity through stable coins. Say there are millions of agentic AIs that are out there doing millions of transactions a minute, and they're using these digital assets. But the base layer, there will be a base layer of Bitcoin. Bitcoin by that time is going to be off to the moon by then, but it will happen.
I think this is a nice transition to, the older age, 50, 60 plus. And I know that you are quite critical of your own generation, right? They don't, a lot of people don't really understand the struggle of millennials and also Gen Z, right? What we mentioned, being able to experience the path that they thought they would have, right? Like the path that they looked forward to. And I think one of the things that I heard you talked about is like housing, right? Sometimes you also see that on like social media where people are complaining, well, my mortgage was 12%. Yeah, but at least you could buy it with, a minor salary or a teacher salary, something that you cannot do now. So if you could sit down with a 20 or 25-year-old that's struggling, or even a 40-year-old who's struggling to buy a home today, what would you say to them? Like, would you give them an apology or give them like a toughen up, or is it just random? It's like random luck in a sense, right? Like boomers had real estate, Gen X had index funds. I think millennials have Bitcoin, obviously. Yeah, what would you say?
There's two sides to that story. You've got to look at this through, you've got to be able to hold two thoughts at the same time. Basically, if you view it from your viewpoint as a millennial and you look at the boomers, you go, what the man? You have destroyed this housing market for us. You have, through multiple home ownerships and the pursuit of real estate, low interest loans, ZIRP, you have been born at a particular time where you had access to capital and you could make investments into homes, watch them appreciate beyond the price or the debasement of the currency, and thus win. But then on the other side of it, I look at from my viewpoint, which is I look around and I see again that you cannot escape this money printer. You cannot get in front of these pricks. So everyone, it's not just boomers, but everyone now is trying to somehow find a way to store value that goes beyond the level of debasement. You've got to be making like 10% probably minimum nowadays on your investments in order to truly escape both the cost of capital and the level of inflation that we really are experiencing. Electricity prices in the U.S. have gone up 34% in 3 years since ChatGPT was released because of AI. Same thing, about the same amount in the last 5 years for all food products, and some of them are off the charts. You can't escape this. So it's normal to think that people like myself are going to do everything we can to try and protect our wealth. Now, if you're young, how the hell are you going to get in front of this? You're not. You are not going to get in front of this. Over the next 3 years, I believe that Larry Lepard's book, The Big Print, is correct. I think they are going to print like a son of a bitch. The quantitative easing, when I say print, I'm talking about liquidity in the system. It's already going on. The Fed is going to be purchasing probably on average, $30 billion a month over the next forever. I don't know how long it's going to go, of short U.S. T-bills. That's a tremendous amount of liquidity. Did you see what just happened on the 26th of December, the day after Christmas? Fed had to come in and put $17 billion in the reverse repo facility. Why? When banks go to the reverse repo, that's kind of a walk of shame. Nobody's going to be out there advertising, Hey, I had to go to the reverse repo because I was out of money. I think it's probably related to a rumor that I've heard about a GSIB, a global systemically important bank that has basically failed. Had a margin call, probably based to silver and futures, and they couldn't cover it. I don't know if that's true yet. I'm still following that story. But the bottom line is, you're not going to outrun these people unless you can find access to those things that they cannot print. And you nailed it. What is that? It's Bitcoin. Yes, I have gold and silver, but gold and silver, if you look at them historically, they can't compete with Bitcoin at all. Bitcoin's got a 400% rate of return over the last 4 years, I think it is. I think gold was like, I don't know, maybe a fifth of that. You just can't beat Bitcoin. I am convinced that it is the wave of the future, and that's where I'm putting my wealth in. The majority of everything I have is in Bitcoin. I just made a huge six-figure purchase yesterday at $87,000. Why? I still believe in this asset. Now, when I say it's the wave of the future, what I'm talking about is if you look around you and you see where the U.S. economy, which is leading the world right now, is going, again, it's digital. No matter how many of these central banks are stacking gold, and they are. Their banks right now have more gold in their reserves than they do T-bills or treasuries. That's unusual, very unusual. It just flipped. These central banks are falling back on an old play that they have used for decades now to protect themselves. That's not going to work going forward. Gold is never going to be the settlement layer that Bitcoin is going to be. So my advice is, try to live within your means. Keep your bills as low as you can right now so that you have some leftover cash that you can invest on a DCA basis and get as much Bitcoin stacked like a smart psychopath. And I think on the other side of this, like I said, in 3 to 5 years, you'll be fine. But I do still believe that it's Bitcoin that's the answer to this.
Yeah, I absolutely love that you highlight this, because I've kind of come to the conclusion that we need to make people more aware of the problem that they're in rather than the solution, right? Like, we think that's Bitcoin. We can get there when we talk to people, right? But understanding that there is a path dependency of all fiat monies debasing something that, in my opinion, is mathematically assured. That's where it's going. You see it, you feel it, right? And you need to do something today. That's kind of my conclusion as to what we should tell to other people, or at least help them to understand, like, whether or not you think you like Bitcoin doesn't really matter. You have a problem, right? Like, there's no pension for you. There are no social services for you. Not in America, not in the EU, like not in the West. That's obviously what I'm most focused on, because I live here, right? But when you look at the reaction of the traditional finance system, and it's funny you mentioned you also have silver and gold. And again, I didn't send you the questions, but I wanted to ask you, how does an old dog learn new tricks, right? It seems like a lot of people go back to this classic way to protect themselves, like gold, right? Like the central banks are buying gold, but they're doing that within the context of a time and a world that's fully digital, right? Like there's a huge mismatch there. And my translation to that is that is the asymmetric opportunity. If you understand you have this problem and you understand the world is digital, is going more and more and more digital, then you should look at Bitcoin. Whether you eventually go with Bitcoin or not, I don't really care. I don't think you really care, right? But that's an individual decision. But, adjust yourself towards looking at the thing that fits within the context.
What I want to say is I just don't want people right now to get shaken out. This is one of the most difficult periods, I think, of all the cycles. I think this may be one of the most difficult periods because if you look at it, sentiment is horrible right now. And
at 90K, 80K.
And why? It's because people still are viewing Bitcoin in either a cycle theory. There are a lot of reasons right now Bitcoin has been in the doldrums, I call it, the Bitcoin doldrums. I don't know if you know anything about doldrums, but it's a area about 5 degrees either side of the equator where the wind dies off. And back in the 1800s, sailing ships dreaded going through there because they were often becalmed, sometimes for months. Sometimes they ran out of water, food, and died.
So no velocity, no speed, no direction, you mean?
There were mutinies. They did something called kedging. They'd put some poor shit out there in a little rowboat, and a bunch of people would row him out, and they'd throw an anchor in front of the ship and then tow themselves up to the anchor and get across the ocean that way. This was not a fun time. That's where we are right now. We're in the doldrums. Okay. And people realize, you have to understand, the reasons are long-term holders are selling. The BT Treasury companies are not buying. ETF weeks is weak right now. People still believe in the 4-year cycle theory. There was no SBR purchases by the U.S. That deflated some of the anticipation. And then the last thing is, there is no investment outside of AI right now. Bill Gurley, VC venture capitalist that I really respect, just had an episode where he discussed that. He says all the people he knows within that space, that VC space and institutions, none of them are buying outside of AI-driven projects. These are the reason. And long-term holders have always sold into, I don't know if you follow Jordy Visser. I'm a very big fan of him. I do follow him a lot. But, his paper that he wrote on Bitcoin's IPO moment, I disagree with it in one aspect, which is it's almost viewed as if this is a unique period of Bitcoin long-term holders selling into bull runs. That's not true. They sell into every bull run. This time, I could scare the shit out of you. I could tell you since the summer to like about December, there were 2.5 million long-term holder coins sold into circulation, which is scary, right? But you know what? The others, you have to look through two lenses here. The other lens is in that insane period of time, you had people transitioning into long-term holders. And if you look at the net, it was only about a 400,000 change in the coin over that same period. So it's just how you view it. The thing that Jordy gets so right, though, is what's unique about this particular period is that we've never had Bitcoin at a $2 trillion market cap at that time, and we've never had the liquidity in the system. We've never even had the ability for long-term holders to go out there and really capture a yield by covered calls, and they're doing that now. So this is a unique moment. We've seen some people cash out here, which makes sense. 100,000 was a big psychological barrier. We've crossed it. But this is going to go away. This will not last. And if you are trading or if you're using leverage or if you just finally it's too painful and you get out of this market, you are going to regret it someday. You will look back. You'll see that all the fundamentals over the last 12 months is the strongest set of fundamentals I've ever seen for Bitcoin. And it is going to rip. I am convinced of it. And that's why I am still purchasing Bitcoin. So I don't even remember what the question was. So I hope that answers some of it.
Well, I maybe to summarize, right? Like I think what we're talking about is that people need to understand that apparently they're living at a certain moment in time where the established, rules-based system, debt-based system, it's going to end in a chaotic manner, not because you and I think it should or whatever our opinion is. It's a repetitive cycle that has shown itself throughout history, right? So fortunately and unfortunately, we're here, but I think that's what anyone has fought at any moment in their lives in the past as well, right? Like, stuff is just happening. So that is just it. And so our whole lives, our whole standard of making money and growing wealth, having homes, building a family, whatever, it's all under the paradigm of fiat money, and that's losing its value at an accelerating rate, right? So like we said, you have to understand you have this problem today, but your future you also has this problem if you don't act today, right? And so we say, okay, you need to own things the government can't create, make more of, but eventually I think also not take away from you, right? So you can hold your gold, you can hold your silver. If I shoot you, I can take it, right? I can confiscate your land, etc. You can kill me, but you cannot take my Bitcoin. At least conceptually, you can get your Bitcoin stack to a point where you can make sure that doesn't happen. So I want to tie that back to something you said before, more like about your mortality or seeing that there's less left than how long you've lived, right? What does this idea of having a legacy or giving something to your children combined with this unconfiscatable aspect of Bitcoin and the fact that you can transfer it to them directly, etc. Like, how has that viewed your idea of what you leave to your kids and how you help them actually prepare for that future that we're talking about?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That's another very insightful thing, because I didn't address that, and I should. What's important about this is the idea of Bitcoin and cold storage that you have control of. The purchase that I made the other day, it's because of my particular lifestyle. I mean, the fact that I grew up in a period when there were companies, there were pensions, et cetera, et cetera. I have money in a 401k that I can transfer and move around very easily, but it's not mine. What did I buy the other day? I bought an ETF, one of the prominent ETFs for my Bitcoin. So is that my Bitcoin? It's not. It's not my Bitcoin. It's just paper. It is a promise, and it can be stolen so fast. One of the things Saylor gets wrong is he does not, when he discusses the fact that, the government is probably not going to be seizing Bitcoin, I don't have any confidence in that whatsoever. The Bitcoin that you hold in cold storage in your fist, that is yours. That's your wealth. It cannot be stolen. Memorize 12 words, and you cannot lose it. These people, no matter what these pricks want to do in the future, that's yours. Look at the EU. They want to capitalize unrealized gains now on Bitcoin, on crypto. What's that going to be like? How's that going to work? In 2 years from now, they've got it so you can't spend more than $2,000 without a KYC type application for Bitcoin. These walls are closing in on us. This digital velvet prison that they are building for us are closing in, and you've got to have a way to escape. Everything that you have outside of Bitcoin and cold storage has counterparty risk, even gold and silver, even physical quantities of it that you're holding. How the hell do you move silver around? Have you ever taken $2,000 worth of silver coins around in a bag somewhere? Do it and see what it feels like. You're not going to be able to drag that shit across any border. But with Bitcoin, you can memorize 12 words, get on the other side of the border, you can go, F you, and you're free. It's the only thing that's going to give you that type of freedom in this world they're building for us. AI, coupled with these digital currencies, and they're coming, no matter what they say. You realize the U.S., out of the Defense Department bill, they just pulled the language prohibiting CBDCs. Why'd they do that? They said they were going to include it, and at the last minute, they pulled it out. Why? Because they want to have that option. There are people who know where this is going. And when you couple it with AI, you are going to have a level of surveillance of everything you do that is going to be impossible to escape. Somewhere, all of us, the real Bitcoiners, people that have Bitcoin in cold storage, all of us, we're going to meet somewhere. We're going to have our own place, our own world. I don't know where it'll be, but it won't probably be in the one that's this dystopian digital prison that they're building for us. I don't want to live there. And the only chance you have to escape that is through something that you can control yourself. And right now, that's Bitcoin.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think this is what people are missing, and to be honest, I think it's hard to grok Bitcoin, to grok like the full opportunity that Bitcoin gives you, all these dimensions that are interwoven, and depending on where you come from with your background and the mind you've been given and how you're wired, right? Like it's just hard to grok. But I agree that the profoundness of Bitcoin in self-custody is under discussed. I think that the fact that the option is there is already something that even when people eventually have different options, they store their Bitcoin in different ways. Like, oh, well, you also have like an ETF, right? Like there's different ways that you can have exposure to and store Bitcoin. But the fact that you could do Bitcoin in self-custody, I think is the revolution eventually, all the way down at the end of the path. That is the revolution in also the coming chaos in a sense.
That's the most important thing. That is the key thing. That possession, to have it in possession. I'm telling you right now, it doesn't matter what I say about ETFs, MicroStrategy, or strategy, whatever the hell it is you're thinking you're holding Bitcoin in. It is only in cold storage with your own hardware wallet, running your own node, that you are truly independent, sovereign, and able to escape. It is critical. And, I'll tell you right now, if the shit really gets bad here, I'm going to end up liquidating a lot of that crap. I'm going to put it into cold storage, geo-dispersed, and I'm going to end up hitting the road. I'm not going to sit here and watch this being built for me and my family in the future. And, I could be very wrong. But remember what I said. These cycles, and we're in the crisis mode, these cycles often end in very violent civil war, revolutions, kinetic wars. You can see right now China's posturing. They've got their chest out and they're running around the island of Taiwan with their boats, their planes. You can get across to Taiwan from China. It's 80 nautical miles. And an F-18, you light the burners, you can be there in about 7-8 minutes. This world is very fragile right now. And again, I'm not trying to be a doomer here. I'm not a doomer. I think this is going to be great on the other side. But again, you've got to protect yourself, and Bitcoin is the answer to that. Bitcoin is the way to protect yourself going forward.
Yeah, so I do want to get to a little bit of advice. I said you cannot learn an old dog new tricks. But you are stacking Bitcoin like a psychopath. What would be your advice? I mean, a lot of people listening are already into Bitcoin. Are there at different levels of understanding and experience. Hopefully, maybe if I put you with your middle finger on the thumbnail, we can reach more people, right? Like that's the goal. But my question is, like, how can you keep your mind open with all these things that one experiences in their lives, right? Like certain things that get into your habits and your beliefs and just, your acting and a paradigm you think you're in. How have you done that, or how have you experienced that? What would you advise to people as to what to do?
Well, I don't let the old man in. And I think I originally heard that from Clint Eastwood. And I thought it was one of the most profound comments. I mean, how many times have you been around older people? They're just a pain in the ass to be around. They're dull. They're slow. They're like, they can't get their head out of their ass to put together coherent thoughts. Well, it's because sometimes it's good enough, and you just accept what is, and you're happy in your little pod. Everything's going great. But you know what? If you love to learn, you can stay young forever. I mean, look at myself. Here I was, and I really transitioned hard into Bitcoin when I was in my 60s and early 60s. And you know what? It changed my life. It gave me a new learning path. I'm every single day I'm reading or doing something that's interesting to me about either Bitcoin, AI, finance, macro, oil. I was one of the things that Jordy Visser also discusses is the fact that China could invade Taiwan. And a lot of times the incentive is given for semiconductors in order to get the chips. But, if you read, if you just study and learn, you realize that that's probably not true. In fact, I'd have to say it's almost impossible. What they're talking about is TSMC. They produce 90% of all the semiconductors used, the sub 5 nanometer for AI. So it's a honeypot, and China would want to have that honeypot, especially since we're in a race between China and the U.S. for AI. But guess what? There's one company in the Netherlands that does all of the actual lift on the lithography behind those chips. It's called the Extreme UV, and it's ASML. And guess what? They have kill switches on those machines. They're $400 machines, each one of them. And that semiconductor in Taiwan, they've got a lot of their machines there. Well, guess what? They can send out a signal and kill those machines forever. They're done. Not only that, they take a nonstop 24/7 supply chain from mainly Western nations in order to keep them going. Again, why do I mention this? Because if you like to learn, if you like to read, and you just like to study, you're going to make it. I mean, that is the key here. Even with AI, even with all the changing jobscape, let me ask you something. Right now, a lot of people your age, they're using Uber and Lyft as secondary income. They get in a bind, they need some extra cash, and you know what? Good for them. They're hardworking sons of bitches. Good. But those jobs are going away. Robotaxis right now are in Austin and San Francisco. And guess what? I've heard at the end of this month, the end of December, they're going to let them go. They're going to take the drivers out of those robotaxis. The fare is going to drop from $30 to $6 for a robotaxi. So if you're sitting there on a corner and you got Lyft, Uber, and you got a $6 robotaxi, who are you going to use? So those jobs are going away. Anything with analytics, anything with data transmission, crunching, anything that has to do, look at my headset. Anything between my ears right now that requires analytics or number crunching or decision paths is going to be done by an AI someday in the future. There are like 400,000 long-haul truckers on the road right now. Those jobs are going away. So how are you going to handle that? You better start reading. You better start being prepared. And again, I'm not trying to scare people. I'm just saying, well, you know what? Maybe I am. I've got a military background. One of the best things I ever did was scare the shit out of myself when I was flying, because I learned some good lessons that way. But the best lessons I got were the ones where I was in a mission planning, and I would plan ahead of time, and I'd say, hey, guess what? I've seen this go wrong before. What if the tanker doesn't show up? What if one of the planes that we're in the formation with damages the tanker probe and none of us can get gas? So all I'm saying is you got to prepare yourself. You got to be thinking of yourself. Your life is a mission. You got a job to do. And if you got a family, you got a job to do there too. You got to be like my mom and dad. You got to put those kids first, put their lives in front of yours, put your spouse in front of you. You got to be thinking about other people and prepare.
Wow. Yeah. I agree. I have some tattoos. I have never slow down, never grow old, which is basically
I love it.
Don't let the old man come in. So I like that. And
I've got one on mine that says strength and honor. And then on the other one, you know what? I've got my wife's name on there on my arm.
Yeah. Well, I also have learn every day, and I think this was great advice, because it's kind of like, No, the world around you constantly changes. And if you want to find your place in the world, whatever that is or how you define that for yourself, and the world can also be small, right? Like it could just be your family and you providing for your family, right? There is no stopping the movement of everyone, basically. Like it is always happening around you, to you, for you, or well, for you more than to you. But I think that's great advice. I think this is also how I personally just ended up with the rational conclusion of being into Bitcoin. Like, yeah, it's just where I ended up when I followed all the different options and you know, things that I could do, only later to realize that this is actually how I can protect myself, right? Like what you just said is that even when you pick a certain path and the door closes outside of your control, you need time and space to figure out, should I go left, right, stop, pause, whatever. And I think having money that doesn't lose its value over time, or at least isn't debased on purpose over time, is the number one necessity in order to prepare yourself for that moment that is eventually coming for everyone, and especially nowadays, right? And so I think it is a really interesting conclusion as to, I don't think only the use case of Bitcoin, but also how you can get there with your mind. Like you need to. There's not really another option, right? Like doing nothing is also doing something, but most of the times, and I think especially in this chaotic future that we're seeing coming towards us, doing nothing is not the move.
It's not, and you know, the thing is that you're touching on some good points here, because yeah, Bitcoin has allowed time to stretch out for me. I don't have the worries that I used to. Over the years, if you just stretch your own vision out, over the years, every year my wealth goes up. And when I say wealth, what I'm talking about is the ability to purchase things. Again, when I was young and I was making all that money, I could never hold it. I could never keep it in something because it was always melting faster than I could ever get more of it. And as the years went by, until Bitcoin came along, there was no way to really store your value, even in real estate. If you look at real estate over a long period of time, you know what? It barely exceeds the cost of capital. And so it was not until Bitcoin came along that I could just start to relax, just to let time stretch out, and also to basically get in a position where I could just tell everybody to go f themselves. It's a great feeling, and it's coming for all of you. The last thing that I want to talk about on that is something else you mentioned, which is at the end of that life, what do you take with you? You know, my wife works in the medical field, and she has had some incredible experiences with people that are on their last breath, and people that were alone in a room, no one in there with them, all alone. No friends, no family, nothing. And then there are other people that were there with everyone gathered around them saying goodbye. When you leave this planet, when you take that ride with the boatman across the river Styx, you take nothing with you. No sat. You don't take anything with you. A toe tag, maybe. So what do you leave behind? I intend to leave something for my family in wealth, but also the thing that's most important is you leave behind memories of who you were as a man. What did you do in life? And I'm not talking about, did you build, you know, a venture capital fund that was number 2 on Wall Street? Who gives a shit? That's not important. What I'm talking about is, did you reach out? Did you help somebody at some moment in their life when they were down and out and at the end of their rope? Like somebody helped me when I was at the end of my rope once. That's the thing that's lasts. That's your legacy. And what you do here does echo through generations. So remember that. Remember, if you have family, if you have friends, you can change a person's life, sometimes with just a word, but sometimes it's what else you said, which is not saying something. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is to be quiet. Let somebody explore their own lives and be there for them if they struggle or they fall. So you take nothing with you from this life.
Wow, but I still want to ask one more question, but I think that would be an amazing ending.
Well, go ahead,
I really well no, but I just want to share. Like I want to say I really appreciate that openness and that reflection. I think there's not a lot of times nowadays where people actually have time, right, yeah, to think about this and reflect, and not to go back to the money problem all the time, but like you said, like in your earlier life, right, in literally a different time, 60, 65 years ago, in your youth, you actually had the time, right? There was time, and I think when you said purchases with money, I think time is one of the purchases, right? Like you can buy time with money to
well said.
Do different things, right? You to try out stuff and whatever, but also to stop and just reflect and see what happens, right? Or let go, or whatever you want. And I kind of feel that, at least for me, with this idea of Bitcoin, it's always how I viewed money, but I only understood it when I got into Bitcoin, that it actually worked when you used Bitcoin as money, if that makes sense. And eventually, I also think it doesn't matter how much Bitcoin you have. This is what I also keep on saying. It's like making that decision that you own your money and then you own your time is, I think, the most freeing thing. And obviously people want more time or be able to buy that, right? So more Bitcoin is better. Like I understand that kind of like search for that. But I think once you make that decision, you already free yourself. I always say, like, I'm mentally retired. You know what I mean? Like,
I like that.
I know that if when it's needed, I know I can do rough stuff, hustle, whatever, like all these things, right? But having the feeling that you can create whatever you want, right? Even the rest of your life, you're going to be in the studio, you're going to create art, and some people want to see it and some people don't, but that's irrelevant because you're doing it for yourself, right? And that is your thing to do, and everyone has like another thing to do, and I just think it's great that you're sharing that, because at the end it doesn't really matter. So you should be able to do what you want to do. And I think the number one thing stopping people today is the fact that the broken money is keeping them from actually getting there, whatever you want to do. Again, right? It doesn't matter what someone wants to do. So yeah, I just want to say thank you, and I really appreciate you, and I think this is a great conversation that inspired me a lot, and I hope we can inspire others as well.
Well, you're welcome, Bram. I think that you've got a lot of insights here that have been very important. For instance, what you just said there about the fact that it is the money that's broken. That is the issue. That's what's driving all of this dystopia that we live in now, all the chaos. The 30-second attention spans, the constant running around trying to find money. And someday in the future, we will be on the other side of this. You just have to get through it. And I know that right now there are people out there that are struggling. They're working their ass off. I've never been one of those people that thought millennials were lazy or not hard workers. I mean, just look at the Iraqi and Afghanistan war. Who the f do you think was in there putting their lives on the line? Who was out there trucking across those hills out there with people shooting at them? It was young people, millennials. So I've never felt that. I mean, it's just a generation that has come out at a very particularly difficult time. Again, it's the great financial crisis is the turning point for America, and probably, considering the fact that we drug everybody into it with us, probably for the world too. And for those people that are struggling, you've just got to put one foot in front of the other. I mentioned earlier, I went through a really difficult time in my life, and I didn't even want to really go on. But you know what? By doing so, by just keeping one foot in front of the other, the next thing you know, I had a great life in front of me. I met somebody that is the love of my life. Got kids now. I got grandkids. I got all kinds of crap going on in my life, and it's fun. And it'll happen for you too. So just be hopeful. Remember, stack Bitcoin like a smart psychopath. These people they're feeding you a line. If you think that Bitcoin's done or that it's reached its peak, 120-some thousand, I mean, you're not listening to the right people. That's not where this is going. I can tell you where it's going. It's going to go up and right forever. And all you have to do is just get it, hodl, occasionally do some DCA if you can, or smash by like me if you're a drunk sailor. But you just have to get the Bitcoin, something they can't print, and you're going to be fine on the other side. It's going to work out great, kids.
George, I truly, truly appreciate you. I want to thank you for your time. I think this is the best way to kick off 2026 when this is out. And I hope to stay in touch, and I wish you all the best.
You too, and to a new year, it's going to be great, kid.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, you can click here to find more just like it, and click here to find all Bitcoin for Millennials podcast episodes. Also, please like this video if you want to help shine a light on the message of Bitcoin, and subscribe to my channel to stay connected. I hope to see you for a next episode. Bye.